Okay, tonight we are doing the skeletal system, and yes, again, I am watching my son play ball and working on school stuff all at the same time. If my husband decides to show up and hang out with me, we will pause it, because sure as he gets in the car, he will have some sort of snack to eat. Okay, so you have some notes to go along with with the flip lesson tonight, and if you'll note on the very back page, there's a full skeleton. I would like for you to label that as the PowerPoint or as the flip lesson is going along. Tomorrow we're going to do an activity with the skeletal system, and so you'll want to make sure that that's as complete as possible. Okay, the first thing to note are that bones are... First of all, that there are 206 bones in the human skeleton. I don't know if there's a page on your notes for that, but there are 206 bones in the human skeleton. And I'm not going to read all of these slides out to you, but it's important to know that bones indeed are organs. Now, the femur is the thigh bone. That's the largest bone. The staples is one of those three little small bones in your middle ear. And the humerus, that's what's pictured here, that is an upper arm bone. Now, if at any point you need to pause to fill in the notes, feel free to do so, but I'm just going to keep going through the material. The skeletal system also includes joints and cartilages and ligaments. The articular cartilage covers the ends of the bones at articulations or joints. Ligaments attach to bones, and tendons attach muscles to bones. So ligaments attach bones to other bones. Sorry, I didn't say that correctly. Ligaments attach bone to bone, and tendons attach bones to muscles. Okay, let's look at the anatomy of the skeletal system. There are two main parts that you need to know. The axial, this is composed of bones that make up the longitudinal axis from skull to coccyx, and the appendicular, which is composed of bones of the appendages, the arms and the legs and the girdles, which attach themselves to the axial skeleton. Okay, once again, I'm not going to read all of this, but the parts of the axial skeleton, the vertebrae, the vertebral column, the ribs, the sternum, the skull, all of your facial bones. And they're pictured here in blue. All of those are the axial, kind of the core of your skeleton. The vertebral column, I'm not going to test you on all the specifics of this. You have 33 bones from before birth, then some of them are going to fuse together, so you'll end up with 26 separate bones in your vertebral column. Okay, the structure of your vertebrae, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the important vertebral features are the spinous process on the posterior, the transverse process on the lateral sides, and then you have a foramen or an opening that allows the spinal cord to pass through. Then you have a cervical vertebrate. These are all right there in the neck, and these are your smallest and lightest vertebrae. And you know what? We can just skip this part. There's no need. We're not going to go into that much detail. The thoracic vertebrate, that is along the spine. And the lumbar, this is in the back, your lower back, much larger than the other vertebrae, mainly because this is what supports the weight of your upper body. Then you've got your rib cage or your bony thorax. Note that some of these, the ones in red, are your true ribs, and then the green and the blue, those are kind of false ribs. The last two pair do not connect at all and are called floating ribs, and they're there in blue. Okay, you do need to know your sternum. This is one of the ones that you can locate on your skeleton on the back. If you just want to call, I don't think there's a line for all the different three of these, but the sternum is also commonly called your breastbone. Oh, and we don't have a picture of the skull. I guess that didn't show up for some reason. The skull is formed by two sets of bones, the cranium and the facial bones. All are joined by movable joints. And the cranium is the portion of the skull that encloses the brain. And I'm not sure why that picture didn't show up as I started the presentation. Okay, the only thing that I want you to know about the hyoid bone, is that it provides attachment for the muscles such as the floor of your mouth, your tongue, your larynx, your epiglottis, and your pharynx. Kind of an important little bone right over here. Alright, these are the smallest bones in your body, and they're found in the middle ear. The malleus, the incus, and the stapes. These are your auditory ocelles. You probably know them as the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. The hammer is the malleus, the anvil is the incus, and the stirrup is the stapes. Alright, now let's look at the appendicular skeleton. These include the limbs and the girdles which attach the limbs to the axial skeleton. We're looking at your legs, your feet, your shoulder blades, your arms, those type of bones. And they're noted here in pink. We've got several of them in all of those different categories. I'm not sure if the notes require you to write all of those down. But you're looking at your shoulder girdle, your arm, hands, pelvic, and legs, and feet. So today we were talking about the clavicle and the scapula in class with the exercise that we did in class today. The clavicle is commonly known as your collarbone, and the scapula is commonly called your shoulder blade, and that's there at the back, that kind of wide triangular bone on your back shoulder is the scapula. And I think you're able to label those on your skeleton at the back. Okay, in your arm bone, there are plenty here that you need to label. The humerus, this is your upper arm bone. The ulna, elbow to the pinky side. The pinky side, that's that back part right there. And then the radius, that front one is your radius. Then you've got some carpus down there that is kind of in your wrist. And the carpus that's just singular for carpals. Okay, now let's look at the bones of the hand. The carpals, one of those would be a carpus. The carpals, the metacarpals, meaning in between, meta means middle, and phalanges, those are your fingers. So label those on your skeleton at the back as well. Now each finger, it's important to note that you have 5 metacarpals, and each finger has 3 phalanges, and the thumb has 2. Alright, then your pelvic girdle. This consists of the coxal or your hip bones, and each hip bone is formed from the fusion of these 3 bones, the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. Now, your ilium, this is the bone that you feel protruding in your lower front of your abdomen, right below the waist, especially if you're laying down. The ischium, this is the bone you feel when you're sitting, especially on a hard seat, like in biology. Sometimes this is called the sit bone, or maybe even like the butt bone. And then your pubis, this is the lower front abdomen near your private area, that bone there. Alright, there are some coxal bones that you'll need to label on your skeleton at the back. This middle portion here is the sacrum, and we just labeled the ilium, the pubis, and the ischium. I think all of those are there on your skeleton at the back. Then the leg bones. We are about a third of the way through. If you're wondering how much longer do we have to go, how many more slides? The leg bones. You'll need to label your femur, your patella, the tibia, that's the front bone, and the fibia is that smaller back bone. Okay, now let's look at the bones of the foot. The bones of the feet are similar to the bones of the hand, but instead of carpals, you have tarsals. 7 tarsals make up the ankle joint, and the foot bones are called your metatarsals. And then toes, like fingers, are called phalanges, and each toe has 3 phalanges, just like your fingers, except for your big toe, which only has 2, kind of like your thumb. Okay, there are 5 different shapes, and you will need to know these for testing purposes. You have flat bones, long bones, sesamoid, short, and then irregular. Your long bones are longer than they are wide. The short bones are usually cube-shaped and filled with spongy bone, and we're going to talk about that. Your wrist and your ankle bones are short bones. Your sesamoid bones are special short bones that form within tendons. The patella is kind of an example of that. Then your flat bones are thin, flat. They're kind of curved. The ribs, the sternum, and most bones of the skull are flat bones. Irregular bones do not fit any of these other categories. And they include your vertebrae and your hip bones. Okay, there's 2 different kinds of bone material that I want you to know about. There's compact bone and spongy bone. Compact bone is also called cortical bone, and spongy bone is also called cancellous or trabecular bone. The compact bone is dense and looks smooth and homogeneous, while spongy bone has small pieces of bone and lots of open spaces. So I've got some pictures here for you. In compact bone, they're found in long bones, and they're surrounded by spongy bone at the ends. Spongy bone are at the ends of long bones. And you can see here how they are different. This is your spongy bone up here, and then your compact bone is along the edges. And you've got lots of nutrients and blood vessels and all that stuff kind of going through them. This is just a picture of the spongy bone under the microscope. You can see the open spaces. You can see the red marrow flowing through it. And this is the compact bone. You can see a lot less space. Bone cells, it's important to note, are called osteocytes. And osteocytes are found in tiny cavities within the matrix called lacunae. Now, it's important to also note in your notes that bones are one of the hardest materials in the body, but they're relatively light in weight. The calcium salts are what give the bone their hardness, and collagen provides flexibility and tensile strength. And this is just a bone cell. Just wanted to kind of show you what that looked like. We're not going to go into a lot of this detail. I'm not going to have you label this on a test. In fact, we're not going to go into any of this detail as well, so you can just skip this. If this is in your notes, you can anatomy of the long bone. And even this one. Just keep moving on. Alright, I do want to talk about bone marrow. You have red bone marrow and yellow bone marrow. The red bone marrow is found in cavities of spongy bone and flat bones, long bones. And the yellow marrow, this is where fat storage happens. Okay, now let's look at joints. Joints are also called articulations. This is where 2 bones meet. They hold bones together. The joints hold bones together, but they also give you mobility. And there's 3 different types of joints. Fibrous, where there's no movement, like your skull. Cartilaginous, and I'm not saying that very well. These are slightly movable, kind of like your vertebrae and your pubic bone. And synovial. These bones are separated by a cavity filled with synovial fluid that allows the most movement. Okay, just to show these in a little bit more detail, your synovial joints, they are reinforced by ligaments. This is where you get most of your movement. And there's lots of different types. Hinge joint, pivot joint, ball and socket, the plane joint, the saddle joint. Okay, so, sorry I had to pause there for a little bit. There are A through F different types of synovial joints. I think the notes may have you write those down. We're going to work with those a little bit more tomorrow in class. But I'm not going to read all of these slides to you because it's just going to make this even more lengthy than it already is. So I'm going to quietly go through, flip through these slides, let you get down the notes. We'll discuss it more tomorrow in class. I'm just going to check your notes, and then we're going to do an activity where you can work with all of these different bones and joints a little bit deeper. Okay, here I'm just going to kind of briefly interlude a little bit. You do need to know these 5 different functions of bones. Okay, on this one, just real quick, an easy way to remember the difference between osteoblast and osteoclast. Osteoblast has a B, and those are bone building. So just put those two, bone building with the B of osteoblast, together. Osteoclasts are bone destroying. Some of you have heard of osteoporosis before. This is just where you have a weakening of the bone. It's usually in women, but can occur in men as well. This is just showing a hip fracture that's been replaced. Okay, I thought it might be interesting to show you just a few breaks, common fractures in bones. This is just arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and osteoarthritis. This is just an inflammation of the joints. Scoliosis, you've heard of that before. This is usually congenital or a result of a disease or a trauma, but this is a curvature of the spine. Okay, and then you should have most of this filled out, and we'll kind of check this over tomorrow in class. Have a nice evening.